Billionaire took his son to the doctor, furious, and froze when his ex-fiancée walked in. Pediatrician, before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Okay? And make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The fever had started 3 hours ago. Sullivan Dresner stood in the marble foyer of his penthouse, holding his 6-month-old son against his chest, feeling the unnatural heat radiating through the baby's soft cotton onesie. Wyatt's usual bright eyes were glassy and unfocused, his tiny fist clutching weakly at Sullivan's black cashmere sweater. Buddy, Sullivan whispered, his voice rougher than intended. We're going to fix this. At 38, Sullivan Dresner had built a biotechnology empire worth billions. He could command boardrooms, negotiate hostile takeovers, and revolutionize medical research with a single phone call. But right now, watching his son's labored breathing, he felt utterly powerless. He grabbed his keys from the Italian leather tray near the door, his movements sharp and precise despite the panic clawing at his chest. The penthouse was silent except for Wyatt's soft whimpers. No nanny, no assistant, no one but him. He'd given the staff the weekend off, craving those rare moments of just being a father without an audience. Now he regretted that decision. The elevator ride to the packing garage felt eternal. Sullivan's reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors. Tall, lean frame, wrapped in expensive clothes, dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, steel gray eyes that had been described by Forbes as calculating and unforgiving. Tonight they just looked afraid. His black Aston Martin roared to life, and he drove through the quiet Seattle streets with a focus that surprised him. Every red light felt like a personal attack, every slow-moving car an obstacle between him and getting Wyatt help. The Northwest Children's Medical Center appeared ahead, its windows glowing warm against the October darkness. Sullivan had donated millions to this hospital over the years, enough to have a wing named after him, but he'd never actually stepped foot inside. The pediatric emergency entrance was busier than he'd expected for a Friday night. A Hispanic mother bounced a crying toddler, an elderly man sat hunched over, holding his grandson's hand, and a young couple whispered urgently near the registration desk. Sullivan approached the receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I need someone to see my son immediately," he said, his tone carrying the authority he was used to commanding. "He has a fever, and he's not responding normally." The woman looked up, taking in his expensive clothes and the obvious anxiety in his voice. "Sir, I'll need you to fill out these forms first, and then you don't understand." Sullivan's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "I'm Sullivan Dresner. I've donated over $20 million to this hospital. My son needs medical attention now." The receptionist's expression didn't change. "Mr. Dresner, I understand your concern, but every child here needs medical attention. We'll get to your son as soon as possible, but I need you to complete the paperwork first." For a moment, Sullivan stared at her, realizing that his money and influence meant nothing in the sterile waiting room. Here he was just another worried father, and his son was just another sick child. He took the clipboard with hands that trembled slightly, finding an empty chair in the corner. Wyatt had quieted in his arms, which somehow felt worse than the crying. Sullivan filled out the forms quickly, his expensive pen scratching across the paper. Wyatt James Dresner, 6 months old, born via surrogate, no known allergies, no previous hospitalizations. The questions about emergency contacts made him pause beside his attorney and assistant. Who else was there? The loneliness of his life struck him suddenly, sitting in this room full of families. Wyatt Dresner. A nurse's voice cut through his thoughts. Sullivan stood quickly, following her down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something that reminded him of hope, mixed with fear. She led him to a small examination room with cartoon animals painted on the walls, and motioned for him to sit on the paper-covered table. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she said, checking Wyatt's temperature with a temporal thermometer. 102.3. Not dangerously high, but will want to bring it down. After she left, Sullivan found himself alone with his thoughts and his son. He studied Wyatt's face, the strong jawline that was already emerging, the nose that looked exactly like Sullivan's own, the way his small hand curled around Sullivan's finger even in sleep. This child was everything he'd ever wanted and never thought he'd have. After Ball left 5 years ago, Sullivan had thrown himself into work, convincing himself that building an empire was enough, but the longing for a family had never truly faded. growing stronger with each passing year, until he'd made the decision to become a father on his own terms. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Good evening. I'm Dr. Rowan, the pediatrician on call tonight." Sullivan looked up as the door opened and the world stopped. Standing in the doorway, wearing blue scrubs and a white coat, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, was Blythe. Her green eyes, the same ones that had haunted his dreams for 5 years, widened in shock as they met his. For a moment, neither of them moved. The small room seemed to shrink around them, filled with the weight of history and unspoken words. Bal recovered first, her training taking over. "I'm sorry. Let me check if another doctor is available." "No." The word came out harder than Sullivan intended. "Please, he needs help." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the baby in his arms. When she saw Wyatt, really saw him, something shifted in her expression. The professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing a flicker of the warmth he remembered. "All right," she said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Let's take care of your son. What choice would you make if the person who broke your heart was the only one who could help your child?" Beal's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she reached for her stethoscope. 5 years of careful emotional distance, 5 years of building walls around her heart, and all of it crumbled the moment she saw Sullivan holding that baby. "May I?" she asked softly, gesturing toward Wyatt. Sullivan nodded, carefully, transferring his son to the examination table. The baby stirred, letting out a weak cry that made both adults tense. "It's okay, sweetheart," Bol murmured, her voice instinctively shifting to the gentle tone she used with all her young patience. But as she leaned closer to Wyatt, she caught Sullivan's familiar scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him, and her breath caught. She forced herself to focus on the child. Wyatt was beautiful, with Sullivan's distinctive gray eyes and dark hair. But there was something else in his features that made her chest tighten. He had the same serious expression Sullivan wore when he was thinking, the same way of studying the world with quiet intensity. "How long has he had the fever?" she asked, placing the stethoscope on Wyatt's tiny chest. "About 3 hours." It came on suddenly. Sullivan's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the underlying panic. "He was fine at dinner, laughing at peekaboo." Then Belle listened to Wyatt's heart and lungs, her professional training taking over despite the emotional chaos in her mind. His breathing was slightly elevated but clear. Heart rate, normal, for a feverish infant. "Any recent changes in eating or sleeping patterns?" she asked, gently palpating the baby's lymph nodes. "He's been eating well, maybe a little fussier than usual yesterday, but nothing dramatic." Sullivan stepped closer, unable to stay away from his son. "Is he going to be okay?" The raw vulnerability in his voice undid her. This was the Sullivan she'd fallen in love with, the man who could command boardrooms, but became utterly human when faced with something beyond his control. "His lungs sound clear, and there are no signs of serious infection," she said, checking Wyatt's ears with an otacop. "Likely just a minor viral infection. Very common at his age." She caught Sullivan's exhale of relief and felt her own tension eased slightly. As she continued the examination, checking reflexes and looking for any signs of rash, she became acutely aware of Sullivan watching her every move. "You're good with him," Sullivan said quietly. Biel's hand stilled for a moment. "I work with children every day." "No, it's more than that. You're natural with him." She didn't respond, focusing instead on taking Wyatt's temperature again. 101.8, still elevated but lower than when he'd arrived. "He's responding well to being here," she said, wrapping the baby in a soft hospital blanket. The fever's already coming down slightly as she picked up Wyatt to hand him back to Sullivan. Their fingers brushed. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent electricity shooting up her arm. She saw Sullivan's eyes darken, and she knew he'd felt it too. Balti started, his voice rough. "Dr. Rohan," she corrected quickly, stepping back. "While we're here, I'm Dr. Rohan." He studied her face, those gray eyes searching for something she wasn't ready to give. "Of course, Dr. Rohan." The formal distance felt like a knife between them, but it was necessary. She couldn't afford to let him see how much seeing him again affected her, how holding his child had awakened every maternal instinct she'd buried along with her dreams of their future together. "I'm going to start him on a mild fever reducer," she said, pulling out her prescription pad. "The dosage is based on his weight. He should be feeling better within a few hours." "That's it?" Sullivan asked, cradling Wyatt against his chest. "Sometimes the simplest problems have the simplest solutions." She tore off the prescription and handed it to him, careful not to let their fingers touch again. If the fever persists beyond 48 hours or goes above 103, bring him back immediately. Sullivan took the paper, his eyes never leaving her face. Blythe, Dr. Rowan, I need to ask you something. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Is there someone in your life? The question hung between them like a challenge. Ball could lie, could tell him about the dates her friends had set up, the colleagues who'd asked her out, the life she could have built if she'd been able to move on. Instead, she found herself trapped by the intensity of his gaze. That's not relevant to your son's care, she said finally. No, Sullivan agreed quietly, but it's relevant to mine. Before she could respond, her pager buzzed urgently. Emergency in room 4. She glanced at it, grateful for the interruption, and frustrated by it in equal measure. I have to go, she said, moving toward the door. The prescription will help. Make sure he gets plenty of fluids. Bell, wait. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, but didn't turn around. Thank you, he said simply, for taking care of him. I know this must be difficult. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Every child deserves the best care, regardless of personal history. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, not looking back. But she could feel Sullivan's eyes on her until she turned the corner, and she knew that everything she'd spent 5 years building was about to come crashing down. In room 4, a 7-year-old with a broken arm waited for her attention. But as she worked, setting the bone and calming the crying child, all she could think about was the way Wyatt had felt in her arms, and the way Sullivan had looked at her like she was still the woman he'd once loved. 3 days later, Sullivan stood in the cereal aisle of Pike Place Market's grocery section, holding Wyatt in one arm while trying to decipher the difference between organic puffs and regular ones. His fever had broken completely, and the baby was back to his curious, alert self, reaching for everything with tiny fingers. Sullivan had never grocery shopped in his life. His personal assistant usually handled such mundane tasks, but something about the normality of it appealed to him now. Maybe it was the way other parents smiled at him and Wyatt, including them in an invisible club he'd never known existed. Formula or baby food, he muttered to himself, scanning the overwhelming array of options. The organic sweet potato is usually a good starter. Sullivan's entire body went rigid. He turned slowly to find Ball standing behind him, wearing jeans and a soft cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with 6 years ago. Dr. Rowan, he said carefully. Blythe, she corrected, a small smile playing at her lips. We're not in the hospital now. Wyatt immediately turned toward her voice, his face breaking into the kind of radiant smile that had been melting hearts since he was born. He reached out his arms toward her, babbling something that sounded almost like words. He remembers you, Sullivan said, surprise evident in his voice. Ball hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, allowing Wyatt to grab her finger. Hi there, sweet boy. You're looking much better. The sight of her interacting with his son did something dangerous to Sullivan's carefully guarded heart. She was natural with children in a way that went beyond professional training. It was instinctive, maternal, beautiful. How are you feeling, buddy? She cooed to Wyatt, who responded with delighted giggles. He's been perfect since that night, Sullivan said. The fever broke the next morning, and he's been his usual happy self ever since. Good, I'm glad. She looked up at Sullivan, and for a moment the careful distance between them softened. First time grocery shopping. Sullivan's jaw tightened slightly. Is it that obvious? The deer and headlights expression gave it away. Her smile was genuine now, reaching her eyes. Plus, you're holding the organic quinoa puffs. Most 6-month-olds aren't quite ready for quinoa. He looked down at the container in his hand and felt heat rise in his cheeks. I have no idea what I'm doing. The admission surprised them both. Sullivan Dresner didn't admit weakness, didn't show uncertainty. But something about standing here with Beale and Wyatt made him want to drop the pretenses. The sweet potato I mentioned is over here, she said, walking a few steps to the right. And these rice puffs are perfect for his age. He can feed himself, which helps with motor development. Sullivan followed her, watching as she effortlessly navigated the baby food section. You know a lot about child development. It's my job. But also, she paused, her fingers trailing over a container of pureed peaches. I always imagined I'd have children by now. The words hung between them, loaded with history and pain. Sullivan remembered the conversations they'd had about their future family, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about the children they'd have together. "Why don't you?" he asked quietly. Biel's laugh was hollow. "Hard to have children when you can't trust anyone enough to build a relationship with them." The implication hit him like a physical blow. He had done that to her. His lies, his betrayal of her trust had damaged her ability to love again. "Belly, it's fine," she said quickly, picking up her own basket. "I have my work. I help hundreds of children. It's enough." But her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Sullivan saw through the lie immediately. Wyatt chose that moment to reach for Biel again, his small hands opening and closing in the universal baby signal for pick-me-up. Without thinking, Sullivan shifted him toward her. "May I?" she asked. Sullivan nodded, and she lifted Wyatt into her arms. The baby immediately settled against her, one small hand tangling in her hair, the other patting her cheek with the kind of trust only children possessed. "He's beautiful," she whispered, and Sullivan saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "He looks like you when he's thinking," Sullivan said softly. "He gets this little furrow between his eyebrows, and he tilts his head just like you used to." Ball looked up at him sharply. "Like me, you don't see it." Sullivan stepped closer, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her shampoo, the way he studies everything before he reacts, the way he smiles with his whole face when he's happy. "That's all you. That's impossible." "I'm not." She stopped, her face flushing. "Not what I should give him back." But she made no move to hand Wyatt over. Sullivan watched her hold his son, and something shifted inside his chest. For the first time in 5 years, he could picture a future that included something other than work and loneliness. "Have coffee with me," he said suddenly. "Sullivan, not a date, not anything complicated. Just coffee. Let me show you who I am now." She looked down at Wyatt, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny fist clutching her sweater. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why?" "Because you're afraid you might realize you missed me, too." The words slipped out before he could stop them, raw and honest and completely vulnerable. Biel's breath caught, and for a moment he saw past the walls she'd built. He saw the woman who had loved him desperately, completely, until he'd broken her heart with his inability to trust her with the truth. "One coffee," she said finally, "but only because Wyatt seems to like me." Sullivan's smile was the first genuine one he'd given in 5 years. "Tomorrow morning, there's a cafe 2 blocks from the hospital. Grind coffee." "I know it." She carefully transferred Wyatt back to his arms, their bodies brushing as she did. 10 o'clock before my shift." As she walked away, Sullivan stood in the baby food aisle, holding his son, and feeling something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Belle arrived at Grind Coffee 15 minutes early, ordering a lavender latte, and choosing a corner table where she could see the entrance. She changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a forest green blouse that brought out her eyes. Then immediately hated herself for caring what she looked like. This wasn't a date. This was closure. A chance to prove to herself that she'd moved on, that seeing Sullivan again was just an unfortunate coincidence that didn't have to derail her carefully constructed life. The bell above the door chimed, and Sullivan walked in carrying Wyatt in a navy blue carrier strapped to his chest. The sight stopped her cold. Sullivan Dresner, Billionaire CEO, wearing his son like a natural extension of himself, navigating the cafe with the careful movements of a man whose priority had completely shifted. Several women in the coffee shop turned to look, not just at Sullivan's striking presence, but at the tender way he adjusted Wyatt's tin-knit hat, and whispered something that made the baby coo with delight. "Sorry, I'm a bit later than I hoped," he said, approaching her table. Someone decided he needed a diaper change at the last possible moment. Ball found herself smiling despite her nerves. "How's he adjusting to all the outings?" "Better than I am, honestly." Sullivan settled into the chair across from her, automatically adjusting his position so Wyatt could see around the cafe. "Can I get you anything?" "Another coffee." "I'm fine." She watched as Wyatt's attention fixed on the soft jazz music playing overhead, his small head turning toward the speakers with serious concentration. "He really does think about everything, doesn't he?" "Just like his." Sullivan stopped himself, but not before Beale caught the implication. "Just like what?" Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying his son's face. "Can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" Belle nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I decided to have a child through surrogacy, I thought I was being practical, logical. I wanted to be a father. I wasn't in a relationship, so I took control of the situation." He looked up at her, his gray eyes vulnerable. But during the pregnancy, I kept having these dreams about what he'd be like. And in every single dream, he looked like you. Biel's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. Sullivan, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to explain something I don't understand myself. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. When he was born, and I saw his face for the first time, my first thought wasn't, he looks like me. It was, he looks like Biel's child. That's impossible, is it? Look at him, Bal. Really, look at him. Against her better judgment, she did. Wyatt had fallen asleep in the carrier, his dark lashes resting against his cheeks, one small hand curled near his mouth. There was something about the shape of his face, the set of his features that seemed familiar in a way that went beyond resembling his father. Genetics are complicated, she said weakly. Sometimes children look like people they're not related to. It's just coincidence. Maybe, Sullivan's voice was quiet, or maybe some connections go deeper than we understand. Bal forced herself to look away from the baby and back at Sullivan. Why did you really ask me here? Because I've spent 5 years trying to forget you, and I can't. The admission was stark, honest. Because seeing you again made me realize that everything I've built, everything I've accomplished feels hollow without you in it. You don't get to say that. Her voice was sharper now, anger cutting through the emotional fog. You don't get to walk back into my life with your perfect son and tell me you've been thinking about me. You're right, I don't. Sullivan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. But I'm saying it anyway, because I'm tired of living with regret. Regret? Bal laughed bitterly. You regret getting caught in a lie, Sullivan. There's a difference. No, I regret not trusting you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. His voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. Cassandra had been pursuing me for months. I thought if I told you I was having dinner with her to finally make it clear that nothing would ever happen between us, you'd worry unnecessarily. I thought I was protecting you from jealousy that didn't need to exist. Instead, you made me doubt everything. I know, and I've lived with that mistake every day since you walked away. Wyatt stirred in his carrier, making soft baby sounds that drew both their attention. Sullivan immediately began that instinctive swaying motion all parents learned, his large hands gentle as he soothed his son back to sleep. He's lucky to have you, Bol said quietly. He'd be luckier to have both of us. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Bal felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I can't do this again, Sullivan. I can't let myself believe in us and then have it fall apart. What if it didn't fall apart this time? How can you possibly guarantee that? Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between her and his sleeping son. I can't, but I can promise you this. I'll never lie to you again. Not about anything. Even if the truth hurts. Even if it's complicated or messy or makes you angry, you'll always know exactly where you stand with me. Bal wanted to believe him, the intensity in his voice, the way he held himself like a man who'd learned hard lessons and was determined not to repeat them. It was compelling, but trust, once broken, was fragile as spun glass. I need time, she said finally. How much time? I don't know. Maybe forever. Sullivan nodded slowly, acceptance and disappointment warring in his expression. I understand. But Belle, what if you change your mind? If you decide you want to see who we could be now, I'll be waiting for as long as it takes. As she walked back to the hospital 20 minutes later, Ball couldn't shake the image of Sullivan cradling his son, the gentle competence of a man who'd found his purpose, and buried beneath her fear and anger was a dangerous question she didn't want to acknowledge. What if he really had changed? 2 weeks passed without contact. Ball threw herself into her work with a determination that bordered on obsession, taking extra shifts and volunteering for the most challenging cases, but every dark-haired baby that came through the pediatric ward made her think of Wyatt. And every tall man in an expensive suit made her heart race before she realized it wasn't Sullivan. She was reviewing charts in the break room when her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, dropped into the chair beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like hell," he said without preamble, sliding 1 cup toward her. "Thank you for that medical assessment, Dr. Webb." Beleg accepted the coffee gratefully. Marcus had been her closest friend at the hospital for 3 years, a brilliant pediatric surgeon with an easy smile and the kind of steady presence that made him popular with both colleagues and patients. "I'm serious, Blythe. You've been working yourself into the ground lately. What's going on?" She considered deflecting, but Marcus had a way of seeing through her defenses. "Remember that emergency case 2 weeks ago? The baby with the fever. The Dresner kid." "Sure. Straightforward, viral infection." "Why?" Belle hesitated, then decided she needed someone to talk to before she drove herself crazy. The father is my ex-fiancé. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. The billionaire, the one who broke your heart 5 years ago. The same one. Jesus, Blythe. That must have been a shock. You have no idea. She took a sip of coffee, savoring the warmth. He asked me to have coffee with him, and I went. Marcus studied her face carefully. How do you feel about seeing him again? Confused, angry, terrified. She laughed humorlessly. And something else I don't want to name. Still attracted to him. It's more than that. Bill set it down her cup and turned to face Marcus fully. His son, there's something about him that feels familiar, Sullivan said. I remind him of the way Wyatt thinks, the way he responds to things. Genetics can be weird like that. Sometimes unrelated people share similar expressions or mannerisms. That's what I told myself. But Marcus, she paused, struggling with how to voice her suspicions without sounding insane. What if there's more to it than that? Before Marcus could respond, Blythe's pager buzzed. Emergency in the NICU, she sighed, downing the rest of her coffee. Rain check on the psychological analysis, she asked, standing up. Always, but Balby, be careful. I've seen what losing him did to you the first time. The NICU emergency turned out to be a premature baby with respiratory distress, exactly the kind of case that required all her focus and skill. For 3 hours, she worked alongside the neonatal team, adjusting ventilator settings and monitoring vital signs until the tiny patient stabilized. It was nearly midnight when she finally left the hospital, exhausted, but satisfied that the baby would recover. The parking garage was mostly empty, her footsteps echoing as she walked toward her car. Dr. Rowan Bell spun around to find a woman in her 30s approaching, well-dressed but with the kind of nervous energy that immediately put Bell on alert. Yes, I'm sorry to bother you so late. I'm Cassandra Mills. I worked for Sullivan Dresner. The name hit Bill like ice water. This was the woman who had caused their relationship to implode 5 years ago. What do you want? BL's voice was carefully controlled. Cassandra looked around the empty garage, then stepped closer. I need to tell you something about Wyatt. Something Sullivan doesn't know. I don't think. Please just listen. Cassandra's voice was urgent, desperate. I was Sullivan's executive assistant for 4 years. I knew about his surrogacy plans from the beginning. I helped him research clinics, review profiles of potential surrogates. Ba felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Why are you telling me this? Because I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. Cassandra's hands were shaking now. I was in love with him. I had been for years, and when he chose to have a child through surrogacy instead of trying to win you back, I thought maybe there was still a chance for us. What did you do? Cassandra closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering courage. I switched the genetic samples, the ones Sullivan provided to the clinic. I replaced them with samples I had stored from a different source. The words didn't make sense at first. Ball stared at the woman, trying to process what she was hearing. What different source? Yours, from when you were patients at the same fertility clinic 5 years ago. You and Sullivan were doing preliminary testing before you got engaged. Remember, the clinic kept samples on file. The world tilted. Bull grabbed the side of her car for support, her mind reeling. That's impossible. That would be illegal. The clinic would never. I had access to Sullivan's accounts. I convinced them it was what he wanted, that there had been a change in his plans. I forged the paperwork. Cassandra was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I thought if the child was biologically yours and his, he'd have to come find you. That it would bring you back together, and then he'd realize he could never be happy without you. You're lying. But even as Ball said it, pieces were falling into place. Wyatt's familiar expressions, the way he'd responded to her immediately, Sullivan's dreams about a child who looked like her. I'm not lying. I have copies of all the paperwork, all the communications with the clinic. I kept everything because I knew someday. Cassandra reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. DNA test results. I had them done anonymously. Wyatt is your biological son, Dr. Rowan. Blythe's legs gave out. She slid down the side of her car until she was sitting on the cold concrete, the envelope in her trembling hands. Does Sullivan know? She whispered. No. I quit right after Wyatt was born. I couldn't face him, couldn't watch him be a father to your child while believing it wasn't yours. But seeing you with him that day at the market, seeing how right it looked, Cassandra knelt down beside her. You deserve to know the truth, and so does he. Ball stared at the envelope, afraid to open it and afraid not to. Inside was proof that everything she thought she knew about her life was wrong. that the child she'd held in her arms felt such an instant connection to was actually hers. Why, tell me now, why not 5 years ago? Because I was a coward, and because I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, it would stop mattering. Cassandra stood up, wiping her eyes, but it never stopped mattering, did it, for any of us? As Cassandra walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete, Ball sat in the empty parking garage holding the envelope that would change everything. Her son. Her son was being raised by the man she'd never stopped loving, and neither of them knew the truth. Ball didn't sleep that night. She sat on her living room floor until dawn, the unopened envelope on her coffee table like a bomb waiting to explode. Every time she reached for it, her hands would shake and she'd pull back, not ready for the confirmation of what her heart already knew. When morning finally came, she called in sick for the first time in 2 years and drove to the one place where she could think clearly, the botanical gardens, where she and Sullivan used to walk on Sunday mornings, back when their future seemed certain and bright. The October air was crisp and the gardens were nearly empty, except for a few early joggers. She found their old bench overlooking the rose garden, and finally opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The DNA results were clinical, sterile, but utterly devastating. 99.97% probability that Bill Rowan was the biological mother of Wyatt James Dresner. She stared at the papers until the words blurred, then pressed them against her chest and sobbed. For the pregnancy she never knew she had, for the birth she'd missed for 6 months of her son's life that she could never get back. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Sullivan, Wyatt, and I are at Pike Place Market. He keeps looking for you in the baby food aisle. I think he misses you. The message was followed by a photo. Wyatt, in his stroller, one small hand reaching toward the camera, his gray eyes bright and curious. Her son, her beautiful, perfect son. Before she could lose her nerve, Ball typed back, "Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important." His response came immediately. "Of course." "Where?" "The botanical gardens. Our old bench." "On my way." 30 minutes later, Sullivan appeared on the garden path, pushing Wyatt's stroller and looking concerned. He was wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look even more intense. And despite everything that was about to change between them, Ball felt the familiar flutter of attraction. "You sounded upset in your text," he said, sitting beside her on the bench. "Is everything okay?" Wyatt made a happy sound when he saw her, reaching his arms up in the universal baby request to be held. Without thinking, Ball unbuckled him from the stroller and lifted him onto her lap, breathing in his sweet baby scent and marveling at how perfectly he fit against her. "Bill, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" She looked down at Wyatt, who was contentedly playing with the buttons on her cardigan, then back at Sullivan. "Last night, someone came to see me at the hospital." Cassandra Mills Sullivan's entire body went rigid. What did she want? To tell me the truth about something she did 5 years ago. Bill's voice was steadier than she felt. "Something that affects all three of us." She handed him the envelope, watching his face as he read the DNA results. She saw the exact moment comprehension hit. His eyes widened, his face went pale, and he looked down at Wyatt with an expression of complete shock. "This can't be right," he whispered. She switched the genetic samples at the fertility clinic, used mine instead of the surrogates. BL's voice was hollow. "Wyatt is our biological son, Sullivan. Yours and mine." Sullivan stared at the papers, then at Wyatt, then back at the papers. "She had access to your samples from when we were doing fertility testing before our engagement. Apparently, she forged paperwork, convinced the clinic it was what you wanted." Ball felt tears threatening again. She thought if we had a child together, it would bring us back to each other. "My God." Sullivan's voice was barely audible. "Bill, I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea." "I know. I believe you." And she did. The shock and horror on his face were too genuine to be fake. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Wyatt, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening around him, had fallen asleep in Blytha's arms, his small hand curled around her finger. "He's ours," Sullivan said finally, his voice filled with wonder and pain. "He's actually ours." "I missed everything," Ball whispered. "The pregnancy, the birth, his first smile, his first laugh. 6 months of his life, and I didn't even know he existed." Sullivan reached over and covered her free hand with his. "I'm so sorry. If I had known, you would have told me immediately. I know that." She looked down at their sleeping son. "But what do we do now? How do we move forward from this?" "I don't know," Sullivan admitted, "but I know we figure it out together. He's your son." To Ball, He needs his mother. The word mother hit her like a physical blow. She was a mother. She had a child. The dreams she'd buried, the maternal instincts she'd tried to suppress, they all made sense now. I want to be part of his life, she said softly, but I don't know how. I don't know what that looks like. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out. Sullivan's thumb traced across her knuckles. We'll do whatever's best for him. Wyatt stirred in her arms, opening his eyes and looking up at her with that serious, contemplative expression that she now realized he'd inherited from her. When he saw her face, he smiled, a radiant, trusting smile that broke her heart and healed it simultaneously. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "Hi, my sweet boy." "He knows," Sullivan said quietly. "Somehow he's always known." Val looked over at Sullivan, seeing her own emotional devastation reflected in his eyes. They were parents together in the most complicated, painful, beautiful way imaginable. "What do we tell people?" she asked. "The truth eventually, but first, we need to decide what this means for us." Sullivan's gaze was intense, vulnerable. "You're the mother of my child, Ball, the woman I never stopped loving, and now we have a son who needs both of us." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe this is our second chance. Maybe Cassandra, in her misguided way, gave us the future we were always meant to have." Bill wanted to believe him. Looking down at Wyatt, feeling the rightness of holding her son, she could almost picture it. A life with Sullivan, raising their child together, building the family they'd once dreamed of. But 5 years of hurt didn't disappear overnight, even with a miracle sleeping in her arms. 3 days after the revelation, Val found herself standing outside Sullivan's penthouse at 7 o'clock in the morning, her hands shaking as she pressed the doorbell. She'd barely slept since learning the truth about Wyatt, her mind spinning with questions and emotions she couldn't untangle. Sullivan answered the door looking haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His hair was musted, his shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Belle, I wasn't expecting. Is everything okay? Can I see him? Can I see Wyatt?" Sullivan stepped aside immediately. "Of course, he's having breakfast." She followed him through the stunning penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, modern art on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary, but all she could focus on was the sound coming from the kitchen. Happy baby babbling mixed with Sullivan's gentle responses. In the kitchen, Wyatt sat in a high chair, more pured sweet potato on his face than in his mouth, banging a plastic spoon against his tray with delighted concentration. "Mama," he said clearly, looking directly at BL. Both adults froze. "Did he just?" Belle's voice broke. "He's been saying it since yesterday," Sullivan said quietly. "I thought it was just babbling." But Wyatt reached his arms toward Blythe, sweet potato flying everywhere. "Mama, Mama," Ball burst into tears, scooping him up and holding him close despite the mess. "Oh, baby, how did you know? How did you always know?" Sullivan watched them, his expression unreadable. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "Something I discovered yesterday." Bol looked up, still clutching Wyatt. "What?" "I hired a private investigator to look into Cassandra's claims. I needed to verify everything she told you." He ran a hand through his hair. "She was telling the truth about switching the samples. But there's more." A cold dread settled in Bal's stomach. What kind of more? She didn't act alone. She had help from someone at the fertility clinic, Dr. Richard Caldwell, the reproductive endocrinologist who handled our original consultation. I remember him. He was in massive debt from gambling. Cassandra paid him $50,000 to falsify the records and make the switch. Sullivan's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They've both disappeared, left the country from what my investigator can determine." Val sank into a kitchen chair, still holding Wyatt. "This keeps getting worse. My investigator found this early this morning," Sullivan said, pulling out his phone. He showed her a series of photos on his screen. Cassandra and Dr. Caldwell, at what appeared to be a romantic dinner, kissing outside a hotel, walking hand in hand through an airport. They're together, have been for over a year, apparently. The whole thing wasn't just about her being in love with me. It was a scam. They targeted wealthy clients, manipulated genetic samples, and planned to blackmail families. Later, the words hit Belle like physical blows. "Blackmail us with what?" "With the truth. Think about it. If they'd waited another year or two, then approached us with DNA evidence that Wyatt was our biological child, what do you think we would have paid to keep that quiet? To avoid the legal nightmare, the media attention. Belle felt sick. They were going to use our son as leverage. My investigator thinks they got spooked when Cassandra saw us together at the market, realized their plan was falling apart. So she decided to cut her losses and tell you herself before we discovered it another way. Wyatt, sensing the tension in the room, started to fuss. Belle automatically began swaying, bouncing him gently, the way she'd seen Sullivan do. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "Our son exists because of fraud and manipulation." No, Sullivan's voice was fierce. "Our son exists because he was meant to exist. Whatever their motivations, whatever twisted plan they had, Wyatt is here and he's ours and he's perfect." Bea looked down at Wyatt, who had calmed at the sound of Sullivan's passionate defense. "But how do we build a life on a foundation like this? How do we trust anything?" Sullivan knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers where it rested on Wyatt's back. "We trust this," he said, gesturing to the three of them. "We trust what we feel when we're together. We trust that regardless of how it happened, we're a family." "Are we?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "Are we really a family, Sullivan? Or are we just two people thrown together by circumstances beyond our control?" Sullivan's eyes searched her face. "What do you think when you hold him, when you see us together? What does your heart tell you?" Bill closed her eyes, feeling Wyatt's warm weight against her chest, his small hand tangled in her hair. When she opened them again, Sullivan was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My heart is terrified," she admitted, "because this feels right in a way that scares me. Because I look at you with him, and I see the future I thought I'd lost forever." "Then maybe we stop overthinking it," Sullivan said softly. "Maybe we just take it one day at a time and see where it leads. What if you hurt me again? What if you hurt me?" He countered. "What if we're both so afraid of getting hurt that we miss our chance at happiness?" Before Bo could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID made her blood run cold. "Marcus Webb. I have to take this," she said, answering quickly. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Bolt, thank God there's been an incident at the hospital. Someone broke into the medical record system and accessed patient files. Yours specifically." "What do you mean?" "Someone pulled your fertility clinic records from 5 years ago, as well as recent blood work we did after you were exposed to that flu outbreak last month. The police are here, and they want to talk to you." Ball met Sullivan's eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there. Their private revelation was about to become very public, and she had no idea what that would mean for their fragile new family. The Seattle Police Department's downtown precinct felt cold and impersonal as BL sat across from Detective Maria Santos, Sullivan beside her with Wyatt sleeping peacefully in his carrier. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their son was the most content person in the room, while the adults dealt with the chaos his existence had unleashed. "Dr. Rohan, we believe the breach of your medical records is connected to a larger investigation we've been conducting into fertility clinic fraud," Detective Santos said, her voice professional but kind. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Dr. Richard Caldwell and Cassandra Mills?" Bell glanced at Sullivan, who nodded encouragingly. They'd agreed on the drive over to tell the complete truth. "Cassandra was Sullivan's former assistant. Dr. Caldwell handled our fertility consultation 5 years ago when we were engaged." Blytha's voice was steady despite her nerves. "3 nights ago, Cassandra approached me and confessed that she and Dr. Caldwell had manipulated genetic samples at the clinic." Detective Santos leaned forward. "What kind of manipulation?" "They switched samples during my ex-fiancée's surrogacy process, used my genetic material instead of the intended surrogates." BL looked down at Wyatt. "The result was our biological son, though neither of us knew it until now. That's felony fraud, falsification of medical records, and potentially conspiracy charges." The detective made notes on her pad. "Do you have any documentation of these claims?" Sullivan pulled out the DNA test results. "Cassandra provided these. My private investigator has also compiled evidence of their relationship and financial transactions." Detective Santos reviewed the papers, her expression growing more serious. "Mr. Dresner, I understand you're quite wealthy. Have either of them attempted to extort money from you?" "Not directly, but according to my investigator, this appears to have been a long-term plan to eventually blackmail families like ours. We need to find them," Ball said urgently. "There could be other families affected by this, other children whose biological parentage was manipulated. We're working with international authorities to locate them. But Dr. Rohan, there's something else." Detective Santos's expression softened slightly. "The person who accessed your hospital records wasn't Dr. Caldwell or Ms. Mills. Sullivan's head snapped up. What do you mean? The breach came from inside the hospital. Someone with legitimate access to the system pulled your files yesterday afternoon. Boo felt ice form in her stomach. We're still investigating, but we have reason to believe it was someone who knew about your situation and was looking for leverage. Before anyone could respond, Bial's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Hospital parking garage level B2. Come alone, or the story goes to the press in 1 hour. Sullivan read the message over her shoulder, his face darkening. Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere alone. Mr. Dresner, we can set up surveillance. Detective Santos began. No, Ball interrupted, standing up. If this person has access to my medical records, they could destroy other evidence. I need to know who it is and what they want. It's too dangerous, Sullivan said, standing as well. Wyatt stirred at the sudden movement, but didn't wake. It's my choice. Beale's voice was firm. This is my life, my career, my son's future. I'm not hiding anymore. 20 minutes later, Bill walked through the hospital parking garage, every shadow making her heart race. She'd insisted that Sullivan stay with Wyatt and the police, though she knew he was probably monitoring everything from the security office. Level B2 was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered throughout the dimly lit space. She was beginning to think it was a trap when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Hello, Blythe. She turned and felt the blood drain from her face. It was Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, the hospital's chief administrator, and someone Belle had always considered a mentor. Elelana, you're the one who accessed my files. The older woman looked tired, older than her 62 years. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Find out what? That you're not the only one affected by Dr. Caldwell's scheme. Eleanor pulled out a tablet showing Belle a list of names and dates. 17 families over the past 8 years. Genetic materials switched. Surrogacies manipulated, all for eventual financial gain. Ball stared at the screen in horror. 17 families. How do you know all this? Ellie Laner's laugh was bitter. Because my daughter was one of them. Sarah went through surrogacy 3 years ago. The child she's raising isn't biologically hers. It's the child of 2 complete strangers who don't even know their genetic material was used. My God, Eleanor, why didn't you go to the police? With what evidence? Dr. Caldwell covered his tracks well. Until Cassandra made her confession to you, I had no proof. Eleanor's voice cracked. But when I heard, through hospital gossip, that Sullivan Dresner's ex-fiancée was working here, and then saw him bring his son to your emergency department, I started putting pieces together. So, you illegally accessed my medical records. I needed to confirm my suspicions. I needed to know if you were another victim or if you were part of the conspiracy. Ball felt a surge of anger. And you decided to blackmail me instead of just asking. I'm not blackmailing you, Eleanor said sharply. I'm asking for your help. You have evidence, resources, connections. Together, we can expose this entire network and help all the affected families by threatening to go to the press. By forcing your hand before you and Sullivan decide to quietly handle this privately and leave the rest of us in the dark. Ball stared at the woman she'd respected for years, seeing desperation and pain in her eyes. What do you want me to do? Go public with your story. Use Sullivan's influence and your platform as a respected pediatrician to bring attention to this. Help us find the other families and give them the truth they deserve, and destroy my son's privacy in the process. Subject him to media scrutiny for the rest of his life. Ellie Launer's expression softened. I understand your hesitation, but there are 16 other children out there whose parents don't know the truth. Some of them might have medical conditions that require knowledge of their true genetic history. Some might be in situations where their biological parents could provide better care. The weight of responsibility settled on BLH's shoulders. She thought about Wyatt, sleeping peacefully in Sullivan's arms upstairs, unaware that his very existence was at the center of a scandal that could help other families or destroy their quiet life before it truly began. I need time to think, she said finally. 24 hours, Eleanor said. Then I'm going to the media, with or without your cooperation. Those families deserve to know the truth. As Eleanor walked away, Ball stood alone in the parking garage, torn between protecting her own family and helping others in the same impossible situation. Sullivan's penthouse felt like a war room. Laptops covered the dining table. Legal documents were spread across the coffee table. And 3 phones rang constantly as his team of attorneys and publicists tried to contain a situation that was spiraling beyond their control. Ball sat on the floor in the living room playing with Wyatt, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while the adults around them planned their next move. The baby seemed to sense the tension. He was clingier than usual, wanting to be held by either her or Sullivan at all times. "The story breaks in 6 hours," announced Jennifer Walsh, Sullivan's crisis management specialist, hanging up her phone. Channel 7 News got wind of it somehow. "They're planning a segment on fertility clinic fraud, and they have enough details to make it clear they're talking about you too." Sullivan looked up from his laptop, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Eleanor must have gone to them early." "Actually, it wasn't Dr. Hartwell," Jennifer said grimly. "Our source says the tip came from overseas. International wire transfer. Records suggest Cassandra Mills is trying to sell the story to multiple outlets." Ba felt sick. "She's trying to profit from this, even after everything she's done." "It gets worse," said David Chen, Sullivan's lead attorney. "If this goes public without our control, we could face lawsuits from the other affected families. They could claim we had information that could have helped them, and chose to keep it private." "But we only found out 3 days ago," Ball protested. "Doesn't matter. In the court of public opinion, you're a wealthy couple who could have spoken up sooner." Wyatt started to fuss, and Beale automatically lifted him into her arms, his small weight grounding her in the chaos. "So, what are our options?" Jennifer opened her tablet. "Option 1. We get ahead of the story. Hold a press conference this afternoon. Control the narrative. Position yourselves as victims who are committed to helping other families." "And option 2, Sullivan asked. "We fight it. Injunctions, cease and desist orders, aggressive legal action against anyone who tries to publish the story. It might buy us time, but it also makes us look like we're hiding something." Sullivan ran his hands through his hair. "What about option 3? We disappear, take Wyatt, and leave the country until this blows over. That makes you look guilty and abandons the other families completely," David said bluntly. Ball stood up, swaying gently with Wyatt. "There's a 4th option." Everyone turned to look at her. "We tell the truth, all of it, but we do it our way on our terms." She looked directly at Sullivan. "We use this as an opportunity to expose the entire network and help every family that was affected." "Ball, that means giving up any chance of privacy for Wyatt," Sullivan said softly. "He'll grow up with this story following him. Maybe, or maybe he'll grow up knowing that his parents did the right thing when it mattered." She kissed the top of Wyatt's head. "I've been thinking about what Eleanor said. There are 16 other children out there whose parents don't know the truth about their genetic history. What if one of them needs a bone marrow transplant and their legal parents aren't a match? What if there are inherited medical conditions that could be prevented with knowledge of their true biological parents?" Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "You want to go public. I want to help those families. And I want Wyatt to know that when faced with a choice between protecting ourselves and protecting others, we chose to protect others." Jennifer leaned forward. "If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. Control the story before it controls us." "What exactly would this look like?" Sullivan asked. "Joint press conference this afternoon. You tell your story, provide evidence of the fraud, announce the establishment of a foundation to help other affected families find the truth, and pursue legal action," Jennifer said, typing rapidly. "We position you as advocates, not victims." David nodded approvingly. "From a legal standpoint, it's our best defense. Shows good faith. Demonstrates that you're not trying to hide anything." Blythe looked down at Wyatt, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny fist curled around her finger. "What do you think, baby? Are you ready to be famous?" Sullivan moved to stand beside them, his arm encircling both her and Wyatt. "Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure." She leaned into his warmth, feeling right for the first time since this nightmare began. "We're a family, Sullivan. Whatever happened in the past, whatever brought us to this point, we're Wyatt's parents, and we're going to protect him and every other child caught up in this. Then we do it together," Sullivan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. 2 hours later, they stood in the conference room of Sullivan's corporate headquarters, facing a room full of reporters and cameras. Wyatt sat contentedly in Blythe's arms, occasionally babbling at the bright lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sullivan began, his voice steady and strong, "we're here today to expose a criminal conspiracy that has affected at least 17 families and may have victimized many more." As he outlined the details of Dr. Caldwell and Cassandra's scheme, Ball watched the reporter faces. seeing shock and sympathy replace the hungry look they'd arrived with. Our son, Wyatt, exists because of fraud and manipulation, Ball said when it was her turn to speak. But he also exists because of love, our love for each other, our love for him, and our commitment to ensuring that no other family has to endure the uncertainty and pain we've experienced. She announced the establishment of the Wyatt Foundation, dedicated to helping affected families pursue legal action and requiring genetic testing, transparency, and fertility clinics. We're asking anyone who suspects they may have been affected by similar fraud to contact us, Sullivan concluded. We will not rest until every family has the truth they deserve. As the press conference ended and reporters filed out, Ball felt a strange sense of peace. They'd made their choice, and despite the chaos it would bring, she knew it was the right one. No regrets? Sullivan asked quietly as they gathered their things. Ball looked down at Wyatt, then back at Sullivan. Only one. What's that? That it took a scandal to bring us back together. She smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given him since their reunion. But maybe some things are worth waiting for. Sullivan's answering smile was radiant, hopeful. Maybe they are. 3 weeks after the press conference, Ball stood in the nursery of her small apartment, packing Wyatt's clothes into boxes. The media storm had been intense but brief. Their honesty and the establishment of the foundation had transformed them from scandal subjects into advocates. More importantly, 7 families had already come forward with similar situations, and the Wyatt Foundation was helping them navigate the legal and emotional complexities of their discoveries. You don't have to do this, Sullivan said from the doorway, his voice gentle but uncertain. Ball looked up from folding tiny onesies. Yes, I do. He needs consistency, stability. Your place is better equipped for a baby, and you've been his primary caregiver for 6 months. That's not what I meant, and you know it. She did know it. For 3 weeks, they'd been co-parenting beautifully. Sullivan would bring Wyatt to her apartment in the mornings before her shifts. She'd keep him overnight twice a week, and they'd spend weekends together as a family. But they'd carefully avoided talking about what it all meant, where they were heading, whether the love that had never truly died between them could survive the complexity of their situation. Bill Sullivan stepped into the room, his presence filling the small space. Look at me. She turned, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. He was wearing jeans and a simple navy sweater, his hair slightly disheveled from playing with Wyatt, and he looked more beautiful to her than he ever had in his expensive suits. I need to tell you something, he said, moving closer. I'm selling the penthouse. What? Why? Because it's not a home. It's a monument to everything I built, trying to forget you. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. I want to buy a house, a real house with a yard and a swing set and a kitchen where we can all have breakfast together every morning. Sullivan, I want to marry you. The words hung between them, simple and earth-shattering, at the same time. You want to marry me because we have a child together, she said, stepping back. That's not enough. No. His voice was fierce, passionate. I want to marry you because I love you, because I've loved you every single day for 6 years, and finding out that Wyatt is ours just gave me the courage to admit it. Bal felt tears threatening. How do I know you won't lie to me again? How do I know you won't decide that protecting me is more important than trusting me? Sullivan was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. Jennifer wants me to do a follow-up interview next week about the foundation, about how we're doing as a family. He handed her the phone, showing her an email. I was going to say no, that we've shared enough of our private life that would be protecting you from more media attention. Bal read the email, then looked up at him questioningly. But instead I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to tell them that I'm planning to propose to the woman I never stopped loving, even though she hasn't said yes yet, and might never say yes. His voice was steady, honest. I'm going to trust you to handle whatever comes next, good or bad. Because that's what partners do. They trust each other. You're really going to announce on television that you're planning to propose to me? If that's what it takes to prove that I'll never hide anything from you again. He took her hands in his. Belle, I know I broke your trust once. I know that saying sorry doesn't erase the pain I caused. But I also know that what we have, what we've always had, is worth fighting for. Bal looked down at their joined hands, then around the nursery they'd created together over the past 3 weeks. Photos of Wyatt covered one wall, toys filled every corner, and in the rocking chair sat the stuffed elephant she'd bought him the day after learning he was her son. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Sullivan's thumb traced across her knuckles. I'm scared that I'll mess this up again. I'm scared that you'll decide you can't forgive me. I'm scared that Wyatt will grow up and ask why Daddy and Mommy don't live together, and I won't have a good answer. And what if we try again, and it doesn't work? What if we can't make it past the history? Then at least we'll know we tried, and Wyatt will grow up seeing that sometimes love means taking risks even when you're scared. From the living room came the sound of Wyatt waking up from his nap, soft babbling that would soon turn to cries if one of them didn't respond. Without thinking, they both moved toward the sound, their bodies naturally synchronizing the way they had every day for the past 3 weeks. Wyatt was standing in his pack and play, holding on to the rail and grinning when he saw them both appear in the doorway. "Mama da," he said clearly, reaching his arms toward them. Sullivan lifted him up, and Wyatt immediately reached for Blythe, wanting to be held by both of them at once. As she settled against Sullivan's side, Wyatt, content in their shared embrace, Ball felt something click into place. Not just the three of them physically, but emotionally, spiritually. "Ask me," she said quietly. "What?" "Ask me to marry you right now, holding our son in this moment when everything feels possible." Sullivan's smile was radiant. He shifted Wyatt to one arm and took her hand with his free one. "Bly Rowan, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Wyatt's mother, and my partner in whatever crazy adventure comes next?" Yes, the word came out strong, certain, full of hope. Yes, to all of it. Sullivan kissed her, then soft and sweet and full of promise, while Wyatt clapped his hands and babbled happily between them. "We're really doing this," Bal said against his lips. "We're really doing this," Sullivan confirmed. All of us together, as they stood in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows holding their son and each other. Bal knew that whatever had brought them to this moment, fraud, manipulation, 5 years of heartbreak, it had also brought them home. 2 years later, the backyard of their Mercer Island home was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and adult conversation as friends and family gathered for Wyatt's second birthday party. Ball stood on the back porch watching Sullivan push their son on the wooden swing he'd built last spring, both of them wearing matching grins of pure joy. "Mama higher," Wyatt called out, his vocabulary now extensive enough to make very specific demands. "I think that's high enough, buddy." Sullivan laughed, catching the swing and lifting Wyatt out. "Let's go see if there's any cake left." Bal smiled as they approached, Sullivan carrying Wyatt on his shoulders while the toddler grabbed fistfuls of his father's dark hair. Some things never changed. Wyatt still had Sullivan's eyes and serious expression. Bafti developed Bal's infectious laugh and her tendency to think carefully before speaking. "How's our birthday, boy?" she asked, reaching up to tickle Wyatt's bare feet. "Cake," Wyatt announced, pointing toward the desert table, where their friends Marcus and Jennifer were cutting seconds for anyone brave enough to ask. "After you eat some real food," Ball said, earning a dramatic sigh that was pure Sullivan. "He gets that from you," Sullivan said, grinning at her. "The dramatic sighing, that's definitely your genetics. The stubbornness about eating vegetables before dessert, that's called good parenting," Ball retorted. But she was smiling. They'd fallen into this easy rhythm over the past 2 years. Gentle teasing, shared responsibilities, and a partnership that felt both familiar and completely new. Their wedding 18 months ago had been small and perfect, held in the same botanical gardens where they'd had their first difficult conversation after reuniting. Wyatt had been their ring bearer, toddling down the aisle with serious concentration, while carrying a pillow with their bands tied securely to it. "Blythe," Sullivan called out Dr. Ella Lanner Hartwell, approaching with a woman Blythe didn't recognize. Their relationship with Eli Laner had been rocky after the parking garage confrontation, but time and the success of the foundation had healed most wounds. "I'd like you to meet Rebecca Chen," Eleanor said. "She's one of the families the foundation helped connect with their biological child." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she shook their hands. "I can't thank you enough. My daughter Emma is here somewhere. She's been so excited to meet Wyatt. When we found out about the genetic switch 3 months after her birth, we thought we'd never see our biological child again. And now," Sullivan asked gently, "now Emma has 2 families who love her, and we have a relationship with her biological parents. It's complicated, but it's beautiful." Rebecca smiled. "The Wyatt Foundation made all the difference in helping us navigate the legal and emotional aspects." As Rebecca moved on to find her daughter, Beale felt Sullivan's hand slip into hers. The foundation had helped reunite 43 families with their biological children over the past 2 years, and each success story felt personal. "Speaking of the foundation," Sullivan said quietly, "I got a call from our lawyer this morning. Cassandra and Dr. Caldwell were finally extradited. The trial starts next month. Bill nodded. She'd known this day would come eventually. How do you feel about testifying? Ready to close that chapter completely? He squeezed her hand. After 18 months of international investigation, they were finally extradited. What about you? The same. I want them held accountable. And I want other families to see that justice is possible. Wyatt had grown restless in Sullivan's arms and was reaching for Bullet, automatically swaying the way she had since he was an infant, marveling, as she did every day, at how natural motherhood felt with him. Mama, Wyatt said seriously, his small hands framing her face. Love you. I love you too, baby boy. So much. Dada too, Wyatt added, reaching one arm towards Sullivan. Yes, Dada too, Belle agreed, her heart full as Sullivan wrapped his arms around both of them. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, the three of them sat on the front porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Wyatt had fallen asleep between them, exhausted from his party, but still clutching the wooden toy airplane Sullivan's parents had given him. Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if Cassandra hadn't interfered? Belle asked quietly. Sullivan considered the question seriously sometimes. But then I think about everything we've learned, everything we've built together because of what happened. The foundation, the families we've helped, the way we appreciate what we have now. He looked down at their sleeping son. Maybe we needed to lose each other to really understand what we were fighting for. Do you think we would have made it? If we'd gotten married 6 years ago like we planned, I think we would have been happy, Sullivan said honestly. But I don't think we would have been as strong as we are now. Going through hell and choosing each other anyway, that's a different kind of love than what we had before. Belle leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rightness of their family unit. I'm glad Wyatt will grow up knowing that love isn't just about the easy times. It's about fighting for each other when things get complicated. He'll also grow up knowing that his parents chose each other every day, not just once, Sullivan added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ball thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The heartbreak, the lies, the fraud, the media attention, the legal battles, all of it had been worth it for this. A quiet evening with her husband and son, secure in the knowledge that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. What are you thinking about? Sullivan asked. Just this, she said, gesturing to encompass the three of them. Their home, their life. How sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. Like us. Like us. Wyatt stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out instinctively. Without opening his eyes, he found both of their hands and held on tight, as if even in sleep, he knew they were his anchor, his safety, his home. And in that moment, Ball knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family forged not by chance, but by choice, tested by adversity, and strengthened by an unbreakable love that had been worth waiting for. Would you have made the same choices they did to go public with their story and help other families, even knowing it would change their son's life forever? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.